We welcome you back to this channel. Today we will explore supernatural experiences in the morgue, where a young worker is haunted by shadows and whispers. A medical student sees a spectral figure, and an assistant discovers a corpse that gives him a message from beyond. Go ahead, turn off the lights, and let's take one more step into the world of the unknown.
The unsettling presence.
My name is Andrew. I never had trouble accepting jobs of any kind, and I didn't think this time would be any different. When I accepted the night cleaning job at the morgue, I did it thinking about easy money. I was always a practical guy, more concerned with paying the bills than believing in superstitions. Besides, the pay was good, and the place, although unsettling, seemed quiet. However, I soon discovered that tranquility in such a place can be very terrifying. My shift started at 10 at night and ended at 6 in the morning. I always arrived with my portable radio and headphones, determined to drown out any disturbing noise with music. The first couple of nights were strange, but nothing out of the ordinary. The long, cold hallways, the autopsy rooms, and the corpse storage rooms made me feel uncomfortable, but I kept telling myself they were just lifeless bodies, nothing more. One night while cleaning one of the autopsy rooms, I noticed something peculiar. The lights flickered intermittently, as if something was interfering with the electricity. I decided to ignore it and continue with my work. However, as I passed the mop near one of the gurneys, I heard a whisper. I took off my headphones, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me, but the whisper continued. It was a low murmur, as if someone were speaking very quietly from the other side of the room. I approached the gurney, my heart pounding. There was no one there, just a body covered with a white sheet. The whisper stopped. I stood there, paralyzed, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was the wind, I told myself, although I was aware that there were no open windows. I decided to continue with my work, but the feeling of being watched never left me. The following nights became increasingly unsettling. I heard footsteps echoing in the empty hallways, shadows moving around me, and those whispers that seemed to follow me everywhere. One night, while cleaning the corpse storage room, I felt an intense cold around me. I looked around, and in the dim light, I saw a dark figure standing in the corner of the room. The figure was tall and thin, with abnormally long limbs and a head that seemed disproportionate. I couldn't see its face, just a shapeless shadow where its eyes and mouth should be. I stood frozen, unable to move. The figure slowly faded away, as if dissolving into the darkness. I dropped the mop and ran out of the room, my heart pounding frantically. That night I decided to talk to my supervisor. He was an older man who had been working at the morgue for decades. I told him what I had seen and heard, hoping he would tell me it was just my imagination. Instead, his face turned serious, and his gaze darkened. He told me I wasn't the first to see things there during the night. That morgue had a long, dark history. Many workers had reported strange things. Some said it was just the atmosphere, but others believed there was something more, something we couldn't understand. I asked if he had ever seen anything, and after a moment of silence, he nodded slowly. He told me that a few years ago, he had seen a woman in white standing next to one of the gurneys. The woman didn't seem human. Her eyes were completely black and her skin was pale like wax. She disappeared when he decided to approach her. That night, I returned to my shift with goosebumps. The whispers, shadows, and figures became more frequent, more insistent. One night, while cleaning another autopsy room, I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. Panic took over me, and I decided I could no longer work in that place. I resigned the next day, but the experience left a mark on me. Sometimes in the darkness of my apartment, I still hear those whispers, as if something had decided to follow me from the morgue. I don't know what inhabited that place, but I'm sure of one thing. There are things in this world that shouldn't be disturbed, things that lurk in the shadows and whisper in the darkness, waiting for someone to listen to them.
The scream from beyond.
I remember that time as a bad dream, from which I can't wake up. It was my second year of medical school and I needed to do an internship. One of my professors suggested that I could apply for an intern position at the morgue. At first, the idea of working in the morgue seemed fascinating, an opportunity to learn hands-on about human anatomy. I couldn't foresee what I was about to experience. The hospital morgue was in the basement, a cold and damp place. The fluorescent lights flickered sometimes, giving the environment a gloomy air. The manager, Dr. Miller, was an older man with sunken eyes and a rough voice. He welcomed me with a smile that looked more like a grimace and showed me around. As we toured, he mentioned that the internships would be intense, but as a reward for the work, I would learn a lot. His tone showed no emotion, as if it was something he said to everyone who came to that place. The first few weeks were relatively normal, if you can call working with cadavers normal. But one night, everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. when Dr. Miller asked me to finish suturing a body while he took care of some paperwork in his office. It wasn't the first time I was left alone, but that night something felt different. While suturing, I heard a whisper. I looked up but saw nothing. I thought it might be the wind, although there were no windows in the morgue. I tried to concentrate on my work, but the whispers became more persistent. They seemed to come from everywhere, and I couldn't identify the source of those voices. I decided it was best to finish quickly and leave, so I hurried. Suddenly, the light started flickering and went out. I was plunged into absolute darkness. My heart was pounding, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to turn on my phone's flashlight, but my hands were shaking so much that I dropped it. When I finally managed to turn on the flashlight, what I saw left me paralyzed. In front of me, on the stretcher, the corpse had changed position. Its eyes, previously closed, were now open and staring at me. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. At that moment, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. It was a woman dressed in an old, dirty white nightgown. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her empty eyes seemed to pierce through me. She moved slowly towards me, gliding rather than walking. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond. The figure stopped a few meters from me and raised a hand, pointing at me. Her mouth slowly opened, and from it came a scream of pain. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, the figure was gone. I regained control of my body and ran. I stumbled down the hallway, tripping and slipping, until I reached Dr. Miller's office. I burst in, seeking refuge, but the office was empty. Panic overwhelmed me. I had to get out of there. I ran towards the stairs and climbed up to the hospital lobby. I could barely breathe, terror suffocating me. I found a nurse on duty and told her what I had seen. She looked at me with compassion and told me to calm down, that it must have been a hallucination due to exhaustion. I never went back to the morgue. I requested a transfer to another department, and they told me that Dr. Miller had resigned suddenly the same night I requested my transfer. No one knew where he was. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night wouldn't leave me in peace. I researched a bit about the morgue and discovered that years ago, a woman had died in the hospital. Her body was never claimed and had remained in the morgue until it was finally buried in a mass grave. Since then, every time I pass near the hospital, I feel a presence watching me. I know the woman is still there, wandering between this world and the next. But I also know I can't go back. The morgue is a place of death, and I have to keep living. I am sure I will never forget the empty eyes of that woman, nor her voice, whispering in the darkness.
You shouldn't be here.
I remember it was a cold winter night when I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I worked as an assistant in a small-town morgue, a temporary job I had taken while waiting for a better opportunity. The solitude of the place and the calm of the night were something I had grown accustomed to, but nothing could prepare me for what was about to happen. My shift started at night and lasted until dawn. It was a simple routine: check the bodies, make sure everything was in order, and perform any necessary administrative tasks. That night, however, there was a strange feeling in the air, a sort of heaviness. Around midnight, while I was reviewing the deceased's files, I heard a subtle noise coming from the refrigeration room. It was a low, continuous whisper, as if someone was speaking in a very low voice. I thought it might be the wind, as the building was old and often made strange noises. But as the minutes passed, the whisper became clearer and more defined. I decided to investigate. I walked down the dark hallway, with only the dim light of my flashlight guiding me. The door to the refrigeration room was ajar, which was unusual since I always made sure to close it properly. As I entered, the cold enveloped me immediately, but what chilled my blood was the sight I had when I illuminated the interior. On one of the stainless steel tables, there was a body covered with a white sheet. This wasn't unusual in itself, but the sheet moved slightly, as if something or someone was underneath. I approached slowly, each step echoing in the glacial silence of the room. With trembling hands, I lifted the sheet. The corpse had its eyes open, which seemed strange, but I decided to ignore it. When I was about to cover it again, I saw its eyes move and it looked directly at me. Suddenly, I heard a whisper and the words, "You shouldn't be here, you shouldn't be here." I backed away, stumbling over one of the tables and almost falling. I looked around, searching for any logical explanation, but there was no one else in the room. Panic began to take hold of me, and I ran to the door, slamming it shut behind me. Back in the office, I tried to calm myself, telling myself it had been a hallucination, a product of fatigue and suggestion. But the whispers didn't stop. I kept hearing the same words resonate. I decided to leave, to never return to the morgue. As I crossed the main hallway, the lights began to flicker, plunging the place into an intermittent gloom that only increased my terror. I reached the exit door, and when I tried to open it, I couldn't. It seemed to be locked from the inside. The key was in my pocket. I took it out and couldn't fit it into the lock. It was as if something didn't want to let me out. I felt a presence behind me. I didn't dare to turn around. The feeling grew more intense, so I slowly turned, and there in the gloom I saw the shadow of a man. His face was pale and cadaverous, and his eyes, empty of life, stared at me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure approached slowly, and as it did, I could see it had no feet, floating slightly above the ground. It leaned toward me and, with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, said, "I warned you. You shouldn't be here." I managed to scream and the figure began to fade. I turned around and kept trying to open the door. After several attempts, I succeeded. I opened the door and ran out. When I got home, I collapsed into bed, intending to forget everything that had happened. I tried to rationalize it, thinking it had all been my imagination, a product of fatigue. After a while, I fell asleep. The next morning when I woke up, I still felt that everything that happened was real. I quit the job that same week and moved to another state, trying to leave behind the memories of that night. Sometimes in my dreams, I still hear those whispers and see those empty eyes staring at me. And each time, I repeat the same words to myself. I shouldn't have been there.
Thank you for journeying with us through the dark passages of these stories. If you enjoyed them, give us a like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more tales of terror. Until next time, where fear will once again be your companion.